Kwame's Pact. Kwame worked tirelessly under the relentless sun, his hands blistered and his shirt soaked with sweat. The parched land stretched before him, a cruel reminder of the farm's endless struggle against nature's indifference. Every crack in the earth mirrored the fissures in his spirit, but he pressed on, his thoughts consumed by the same unyielding determination that had kept him alive all these years. His daughter, Ao, was the light of his life, the reason he refused to surrender to despair. She hummed softly in the distance, tending to the goats as she often did, her voice a gentle melody that soothed his weary soul. Her dreams of becoming a healer for the village were a source of pride for Kwame, though they also filled him with a deep, gnawing guilt. How could he provide the life she deserved when even the basics were a daily struggle? The village of Nyoka, a cluster of mud brick houses and thatched roofs, lay a short walk from Kwame's farm. On market day, Kwame loaded his cart with the meager harvest he managed to scrape together. The yams were small, the beans sparse, and the maize showed signs of blight. As he arrived at the bustling village square, the vibrant energy of traders and storytellers seemed to mock his quiet desperation. He stood by his stall, watching as buyers passed him by, their interest caught by the more abundant offerings of other farmers. When an old friend approached, Kwame welcomed the distraction. The man spoke of a neighboring farmer who had risen from poverty to prosperity overnight, a transformation so drastic it bordered on the miraculous. "They say he met someone, a stranger with golden eyes," the man whispered, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "This stranger offers wealth in exchange for promises. But beware, Kwame. Riches come at a cost." Kwame laughed, shaking his head at the absurdity of such tales. Yet, as the day wore on and his cart remained full, his friend's words lingered. That night, alone by the fire, Kwame allowed himself to dream of what could be. A life free of debt, where Ao could study and grow without the weight of their struggles bearing down on her. But dreams often invite danger, and as the embers of the fire flickered, a figure emerged from the shadows. The man was tall, his presence both commanding and unsettling. His golden eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness, and his voice carried an otherworldly resonance. "Kwame," the stranger said, his tone calm yet laden with an undeniable power. "I have watched you. Your toil, your sacrifices, your love for your daughter. You are a man deserving of more than this barren existence." Kwame's heart pounded as he listened, torn between fear and fascination. The stranger spoke of wealth and prosperity, of fertile lands and bountiful harvests. All Kwame had to do was agree to a simple promise, a commitment to fulfill a request when the time came. It was an offer that seemed too good to be true, yet Kwame could not dismiss it. The thought of giving Ao a life of abundance overpowered his doubts. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "I accept." The stranger's lips curved into a faint smile, and with a snap of his fingers, he disappeared into the night. Kwame stared at the spot where the man had stood, a mixture of relief and unease settling over him. The following morning, the transformation began. The soil of his farm, once dry and unyielding, became rich and dark. Crops sprouted with vigor, their growth almost unnatural in its rapidity. Within weeks, Kwame's fortunes changed. He paid off his debts, purchased new livestock, and even began planning a proper home for Ao. The villagers, once pitying and dismissive, now regarded him with a mix of awe and suspicion. But not all was as it seemed. One morning, Kwame discovered a withered tree at the edge of his farm, its bark blackened as if scorched by some unseen force. Days later, one of his healthiest goats fell ill and died without explanation. Ao, too, began to change. Her laughter grew less frequent, her eyes shadowed by dark circles. She spoke of vivid dreams in which the man with golden eyes appeared, watching her from across a river shrouded in mist. Kwame dismissed her fears as mere nightmares, but the unease in his chest grew. He awoke one night to find Ao standing at the foot of his bed, trembling and pale. "He was here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was calling me." Kwame held her close, his mind racing. The promise he had made, a simple agreement, or so he had thought, was unraveling before his eyes. The stranger's words echoed in his memory, and for the first time, he began to grasp the depth of his mistake. The wealth he had gained came with a shadow, and that shadow had begun to envelop the one thing he cherished most. The weight of the promise. Ao's once radiant smile faded further with each passing day. The warmth in her voice that had filled their humble home now felt like a distant memory. Her dreams became darker, more vivid, and her health began to deteriorate. Kwame watched helplessly as his daughter, his pride and joy, grew weaker. The shadows under her eyes deepened, and her steps slowed as if an unseen force drained her energy. She refused to eat much, and her once hearty laughter became a quiet, hesitant chuckle, if it appeared at all. The village of Nyoka began to take notice. Whispers grew louder, curiosity evolving into suspicion. Kwame had risen from hardship so quickly, and now his daughter was wasting away under mysterious circumstances. The villagers avoided his farm, their gazes lingering on him when he came to the marketplace. Some murmured about curses, while others spoke openly of the stranger with golden eyes. "There is no gift without a price," the elders warned, their words laced with the heavy weight of superstition. Kwame struggled to ignore the growing isolation. He buried himself in his work, hoping that the prosperity of his farm could somehow shield him from the consequences of his choice. The crops were thriving like never before, their abundance almost mocking him. The very success he had yearned for now felt like a cruel illusion, a mirage that had cost him more than he could bear. He tried to comfort Ao, to convince her that her dreams were merely the workings of an overactive mind, but she saw through his reassurances. She looked at him with eyes that seemed older than her 16 years, filled with a quiet understanding and unspoken questions. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of amber and crimson, Kwame sought counsel from the village elder, Nana Oba. The old woman lived on the outskirts of Nyoka, her hut surrounded by ancient baobab trees that seemed to hum with secrets. Nana Oba was known for her wisdom, a keeper of the village's stories and traditions. If anyone could help, it would be her. Kwame arrived at her hut, his heart heavy with both hope and fear. The elder greeted him with a knowing look, her clouded eyes piercing through the veil of his silence. She gestured for him to sit and waited patiently as he struggled to find the words. When he finally spoke, the confession tumbled out in a torrent of guilt and desperation. He recounted the stranger's visit, the pact he had made, and the strange occurrences that had followed. Nana Oba listened without interruption, her weathered hands resting on her knees. When Kwame finished, she closed her eyes and took a long, deep breath. "You have entangled yourself with forces older and more powerful than you can comprehend," she said, her voice steady but grave. "The man with golden eyes is no man at all. He is a spirit, a guardian of the balance. His purpose is not to bring fortune, but to test the hearts of men. And your heart, Kwame, was clouded by desire." Kwame's head dropped in shame. "I only wanted to give Ao a better life," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know. I didn't realize." "The spirit does not trick," Nana Oba replied. "He reveals. And what he reveals is not always what we wish to see. The promise you made binds not only you, but those you love. The price of your desire is now being paid by your daughter." Kwame's stomach churned. "How do I undo it? How do I save her?" The elder leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "To break the bond, you must confront the spirit in his domain. But be warned, the path is perilous, and the spirit's realm is not like ours. It is a place of shadows and truths, where you will face not only him, but yourself." Desperation fueled Kwame's resolve. He left Nana Oba's hut with a heavy heart, but a renewed sense of purpose. That night, as the village settled into slumber, Kwame prepared for his journey. He packed only the essentials, a small bag of provisions, a knife for protection, and a charm Nana Oba had given him, crafted from woven grass and adorned with beads. "It will not save you," she had said, "but it may guide you when you feel lost." The first step of his journey took him to the river. The river Nyoka, known for its treacherous currents and murky depths, marked the boundary between the physical world and the spirit's domain. Kwame approached its banks with caution, the water shimmering under the moonlight. A faint mist hovered above the surface, and the air felt heavy, charged with an otherworldly energy. As Kwame stood at the edge, the river seemed to shift, its currents moving unnaturally, as if alive. A chill ran down his spine, but he steeled himself and waded into the water. The current tugged at him with increasing force, and the murmur of the river grew louder, whispering his name in tones both alluring and terrifying. He clung to the charm around his neck, its rough texture grounding him as he struggled forward. The crossing felt like an eternity. The water rose higher with each step, and shadows danced in the corners of his vision. Just as he felt he could go no further, a sudden stillness enveloped him. He emerged on the other side, gasping for breath, his body trembling. The landscape before him was unlike anything he had ever seen. The spirit's domain stretched endlessly, a realm of shifting shadows and thick mist. The air was cold and damp, filled with faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. The ground beneath Kwame's feet was neither solid nor liquid, an unsettling texture that made every step a test of will. The only constant was the faint glimmer of golden light in the distance, a beacon that both guided and taunted him. Kwame moved toward the light, each step feeling heavier than the last. The whispers grew louder, their tones sharp and accusatory. They spoke of his greed, his failures, his fears. They echoed his deepest regrets, the wounds he had tried to bury. He clung to the thought of Ao, her face clear in his mind, her laughter a distant memory that fueled his resolve. As he drew closer to the golden light, a figure emerged from the mist. The spirit stood tall and imposing, his golden eyes glowing with an intensity that made Kwame's knees weaken. The spirit said nothing, his gaze piercing and unrelenting. Kwame's voice shook as he spoke. "I have come to fulfill my promise. But I beg you, spare my daughter. Take me instead." The spirit tilted his head, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the whispers silencing as if waiting for the spirit's response. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low rumble that resonated through the realm. "You offer yourself, but do you truly understand what you have given? The promise is not so easily undone." The test of truth. Kwame stood frozen under the spirit's piercing gaze, the weight of his words hanging in the cold, oppressive air. His offer to sacrifice himself in Ao's place had been made with desperation, but now, in the presence of this otherworldly being, he felt the true gravity of his actions. The spirit stepped closer, his golden eyes gleaming like molten suns, reflecting truths Kwame had long tried to bury. "You speak of sacrifice," the spirit began, his voice deep and resonant, reverberating through the shifting shadows. "But sacrifice is not just the giving of oneself. It is the understanding of what you have taken, what you have broken, and what you must mend. Do you truly believe you can bear the weight of your choice?" Kwame's throat felt dry, his words caught somewhere between courage and fear. "I was blinded by my love for Ao," he said, his voice faltering. "I thought I was giving her a better life, but I see now that I was wrong. I ask only for a chance to make it right." The spirit regarded him in silence for a long moment before gesturing with a slow sweep of his hand. The mists around them began to shift and churn, revealing fragmented scenes from Kwame's past. They floated before him like ghostly projections, vivid and haunting. In one, he saw himself refusing to share a sack of grain with a neighbor during a particularly harsh season, fearing he wouldn't have enough for Ao. In another, he turned away a young boy seeking work on the farm, unwilling to part with even a small share of his modest income. These moments, long buried in his memory, now returned with startling clarity. "You speak of love," the spirit said, his tone unwavering, "but love without wisdom breeds destruction. You sought to give your daughter a better life, yet you denied others the means to survive. The pact you made was not born of selflessness, Kwame, it was born of pride and fear. Now you must face what lies within you." The visions shifted, and Kwame was no longer standing in the misty domain. He found himself back on his farm, but something was wrong. The sky was unnaturally dark, and the crops that had once flourished were now twisted and withered. He saw Ao in the distance, kneeling by the riverbank, her shoulders trembling as if she were sobbing. Kwame ran to her, calling her name, but the closer he got, the further away she seemed. Suddenly, the ground beneath him gave way, and he was falling into an abyss of darkness and whispers. The voices grew louder, accusing him of his failures, his greed, his inability to protect the one he loved most. Kwame landed hard on an invisible surface, gasping for breath. He was no longer on his farm, nor in the spirit's domain. He was in a void, a space that seemed to exist outside time and reality. Before him stood three figures, each cloaked in shadows. Their forms were indistinct, but their presence was overpowering. They spoke in unison, their voices a harmony of malevolence and sorrow. "To prove your worth, you must face the truth of who you are. Only through understanding can redemption be found." The first figure stepped forward, holding a mirror. Its surface shimmered, reflecting not Kwame's face but a younger version of himself, back when his wife was still alive. The image showed a moment of cruelty Kwame had long tried to forget, a time when he had lashed out at her in frustration over the struggles of their life. Though the memory had faded, the guilt remained, hidden in the recesses of his heart. "You carry anger like a shield," the figure said. "It has driven you, but it has also blinded you. Do you have the strength to lay it down?" Kwame's chest tightened as he stared at the mirror. "I was weak," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I took my pain out on the one person who loved me unconditionally. If I could undo it, I would. But I cannot change the past." The mirror dissolved into mist, and the first figure retreated. The second stepped forward, holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. When the figure unraveled it, Kwame saw that it contained a pile of golden coins, more wealth than he had ever dreamed of. But the coins were stained with something dark, and the sight of them filled him with a deep unease. "You sought wealth not for yourself, but for your daughter," the second figure said. "Yet in doing so, you overlooked the wealth you already had. Love, community, and the strength to endure. Do you see now what your greed has cost you?" Kwame nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the tarnished coins. "I thought I was doing what was best for Ao," he said. "But I see now that I was chasing a dream that wasn't mine to give. She never needed riches. She needed me to be present, to be content with what we had." The bundle vanished, and the second figure stepped back. The third and final figure moved forward, holding a single, glowing orb of light. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, and Kwame instinctively reached for it. But the figure pulled back, its shadowy form looming over him. "This is the essence of your daughter's life," the figure said. "It is fragile, yet it burns bright. To save her, you must prove that you are worthy, not through words, but through sacrifice. Are you willing to give all that you are to protect what you have left?" Kwame dropped to his knees, his body trembling. "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "Take my life, my soul, whatever you must. Just let Ao live. Let her be free of this curse." The void around him began to dissolve, the shadows retreating as a warm light enveloped him. Kwame felt himself lifted, weightless, as if his very essence were being pulled apart and reassembled. He heard the spirit's voice, distant but clear. "You have faced the truths within you, Kwame, and you have chosen love over pride. The path to redemption is not easy, but you have taken the first step." When Kwame opened his eyes, he was back on the riverbank, the morning sun breaking through the mist. Ao was there, standing at the edge of the water, her face alight with a radiance he hadn't seen in months. She ran to him, her arms wrapping around him tightly. "Papa," she said, her voice filled with joy and relief. "The dreams, they're gone. I feel free." Kwame held her close, tears of gratitude streaming down his face. He had crossed the river not just to save his daughter, but to save himself. The promise had been fulfilled, and though the scars of his choices would remain, he had been given a second chance to cherish what truly mattered. Shadows in the village. Kwame and Ao returned to the farm, the sun's warmth comforting them after the harrowing ordeal. The once looming dread had lifted, and for the first time in months, Kwame felt a fragile sense of peace. Ao's health improved rapidly. Her cheeks regained their rosy hue, and her laughter once again filled the air. It seemed the Pact's curse had finally been broken. But the village of Nyoka, once bustling with community and trust, now regarded the pair with suspicion and unease. The whispers had not ceased. Despite Ao's recovery and Kwame's visible efforts to mend his ways, the villagers continued to speculate about the unnatural nature of his sudden wealth. Where once he had been greeted with warm smiles and friendly conversations in the marketplace, now he faced averted gazes and murmured accusations. Some claimed he had struck a deal with the underworld, while others spoke of curses that could spill over onto the rest of the community. The isolation weighed heavily on Kwame. He had fought so hard to save his daughter, but now he wondered if his efforts had come at the cost of their place in the village. Ao noticed her father's unease and tried to reassure him, often saying, "Papa, we have each other. That's what matters." But Kwame could not shake the guilt that gnawed at him, guilt for the pact he had made and the damage it had caused. One evening, as the sky turned a deep indigo and the first stars appeared, Kwame decided to address the villagers. He gathered his courage and made his way to the central square, where the people of Nyoka often assembled to share stories and news. Ao, sensing his determination, followed close behind. When Kwame arrived, the square was alive with activity. Children darted between the traders' stalls, and the scent of roasted yams filled the air. But as soon as Kwame stepped into view, the lively chatter diminished to an uneasy silence. All eyes turned to him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Clearing his throat, Kwame raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "My friends, I know there have been rumors about me, about my family, my farm, and the stranger who visited me. I do not deny that strange things have happened, but I ask for your understanding and your forgiveness." The villagers exchanged glances, their silence heavy with judgment. Finally, one of the elders, a wiry man named Adissa, stepped forward. "Kwame," he said, his tone cautious but firm, "we have seen the changes in you and your land. We have heard the stories of the stranger with golden eyes. If you wish for our forgiveness, then tell us the truth. What did you trade for your wealth?" Kwame hesitated, his heart pounding. He could feel Ao's eyes on him, her presence a steadying force. "I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I was desperate to provide a better life for Ao. When the stranger came, I agreed to his offer. I thought it was a blessing, but it turned out to be a curse." The crowd murmured, their voices rising in a mixture of disbelief and condemnation. Another villager, a young woman named Binta, spoke up. "And what of the curse? Have you brought it upon us as well?" "No," Kwame said quickly, his voice firm. "The curse was tied to me and my choices. I faced the spirit and fulfilled my promise. Ao is safe now, and the curse is broken." Adissa frowned, his expression skeptical. "And what assurance do we have that the spirit will not return? What if your actions have angered it further?" Before Kwame could respond, Ao stepped forward, her small frame radiating an unexpected strength. "The spirit is gone," she said, her voice steady. "I felt it leave, just as I felt its hold over me. My father may have made mistakes, but he risked everything to save me. If you doubt him, then doubt me as well." Her words hung in the air, their quiet power silencing the crowd. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Nana Oba, the village elder who had counseled Kwame, stepped out of the shadows. Her presence commanded respect, and the villagers parted to let her through. "Nana," Adissa said, bowing his head, "what do you make of this?" The old woman surveyed Kwame and Ao, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "The spirit with golden eyes does not linger where its purpose has been fulfilled," she said. "If Kwame speaks the truth, and I believe he does, then the matter is closed. But let this be a lesson to us all. Greed and desperation can cloud even the purest of intentions. We must be vigilant in protecting our hearts and our community." The villagers murmured their agreement, though their unease had not entirely dissipated. Kwame bowed his head, humbled by Nana Oba's support. "Thank you," he said softly. "I will spend the rest of my days making amends, not just to you all, but to my daughter and myself." The crowd slowly dispersed, the tension easing but not disappearing entirely. Some villagers offered small nods of acknowledgement as they passed, while others avoided Kwame's gaze. It was not forgiveness, but it was a start. As Kwame and Ao walked back to the farm, the night air felt lighter, though the weight of their journey was far from gone. "You were brave," Kwame said, glancing at his daughter. "Speaking to the village like that." Ao smiled faintly. "You taught me to stand up for what matters, Papa. I just followed your example." Kwame's chest swelled with pride, but also with a renewed sense of responsibility. He had faced the spirit and survived, but his greatest challenge lay ahead, rebuilding trust, not just with the village, but within himself. The farm, bathed in moonlight, seemed quieter than usual when they returned. Kwame looked out over the fields, the crops swaying gently in the breeze. The land had given him everything he had once dreamed of, but it had also taken him to the brink of ruin. Now it was up to him to cultivate more than just the soil. He would sow seeds of humility, patience, and gratitude, hoping they would bear fruit in the lives he touched. Unbeknownst to Kwame, however, the spirit's work was not entirely done. Far beyond the river, in the misty realm where shadows and whispers dwelled, the golden eyes flickered once more. The spirit watched silently, its purpose shifting as it prepared for the next test. Not for Kwame, but for those who had judged him. The echoes of judgment. The days passed slowly, and while Ao regained her vitality, the tension in Nyoka lingered like an unspoken curse. Kwame threw himself into his work, tending to the farm with a renewed purpose, hoping that his diligence would help restore his reputation among the villagers. Ao, on the other hand, began to immerse herself in her studies of herbal medicine. She visited the jungle frequently, gathering plants and speaking with elders who shared their knowledge of healing traditions. The farm became a place of quiet determination, but the outside world still simmered with unease. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, a knock came at their door. Ao answered to find Nana Oba standing on the threshold, her expression troubled. Kwame appeared moments later, wiping his hands on a cloth, his brow furrowed in concern. "Nana, what brings you here so early?" he asked. The elder stepped inside, leaning heavily on her walking stick. "Kwame," she began, her voice low, "I fear the spirit has not finished its work. Something stirs within the village. People are restless, and I have seen signs that trouble me." Kwame stiffened. "What kind of signs?" Nana Oba hesitated before speaking. "Dreams," she said finally. "Dreams of golden eyes watching from the shadows. Some villagers have begun to feel, marked, as if the spirit now lingers among us. And last night, Binta's youngest child fell ill with a fever no healer can explain. Ao gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But the spirit is gone, Nana. I felt it leave. The elder's gaze softened as she looked at Ao. The spirit may no longer hold you, child, but its presence was a ripple in the waters of our world. Sometimes ripples become waves, and sometimes those waves crash where we least expect. Kwame's heart sank. He had hoped the ordeal was over, that his confrontation with the spirit had paid the price for his mistakes. But if Nana Oba was right, the spirit's test was not just for him, it was for the entire village. What do we do? He asked, his voice steady despite the dread building inside him. Nana Oba fixed him with a piercing look. The spirit tests not only the individual but the collective. The village must confront its own fears, its own judgments. And you, Kwame, must lead them. Kwame's pulse quickened. Me? How can I lead a village that barely trusts me? Trust is earned, not given, Nana Oba said firmly. You have already begun that work. Now you must continue it. That evening, Kwame and Ao accompanied Nana Oba to the village square. The elder called for a gathering, her voice ringing out over the rooftops. Slowly, the villagers assembled, their faces etched with worry. The square was lit by torches, their flames casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance with the unease in the air. Nana Oba stood in the center, her presence commanding. People of Nyoka, she began, her voice steady but urgent, we are facing something greater than any one of us. The spirit with golden eyes came to test Kwame, but its ripples have reached us all. We must now decide how we will respond. Not with fear, not with judgment, but with unity. A murmur ran through the crowd, but Adissa stepped forward, his expression skeptical. And what unity do you speak of, Nana? Kwame brought this upon us with his greed. How can we trust that he won't bring more harm? Kwame took a deep breath and stepped forward. You're right to question me, Adissa, he said, his voice strong despite the trembling in his hands. I made mistakes born of desperation and pride. But I have paid a price for those mistakes, and I will continue to make amends for as long as I live. This is not just about me anymore. It's about all of us. The spirit saw something in this village, something that needed to be revealed. If we face it together, we can overcome it. Adissa frowned but said nothing. The villagers looked uncertain, their whispers filling the silence. Finally, Ao stepped forward, her voice clear and firm. We cannot change the past, but we can choose how we move forward. My father has done everything he can to protect me, to protect all of us. If we stand together, we can face whatever comes. Her words seemed to resonate with the crowd. Slowly, heads began to nod, and the murmurs softened. Nana Oba raised her hand for silence. Very well, she said. If we are to face this, we must do so with open hearts. Tonight, we will hold a vigil at the river. We will light fires and speak truths, not just to the spirit, but to each other. Only then can we hope to mend what has been broken. The villagers agreed, though their apprehension was palpable. As the sun set, they gathered by the river, carrying torches and offerings of food and flowers. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs, and the sound of drums echoed through the jungle. Kwame stood at the edge of the gathering, his heart heavy with the weight of his role in what was unfolding. One by one, the villagers stepped forward to speak their truths. Vinta admitted to harboring jealousy over Kwame's newfound wealth, while Adissa confessed his fear of change and his resistance to trust. Others spoke of their own failings, greed, resentment, and the judgment they had passed on one another. When it was Kwame's turn, he stepped forward, his voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to choke him. I have lived my life with a heavy heart, he said. I thought I was doing what was best for my daughter, but in my pride, I failed to see the harm I was causing. I have learned that love is not about giving wealth or power. It is about being present, about listening, about choosing humility over pride. I ask for your forgiveness, not just for me, but for the sake of my daughter and our village. The crowd was silent, the only sound the crackling of the torches and the gentle flow of the river. Then Nana Oba stepped forward, raising her arms. The spirit tests us no more, she said, her voice ringing out over the gathering. We have spoken our truths, and in doing so, we have faced the shadows within ourselves. Let this be the beginning of healing, not just for Kwame, but for all of Nyoka. As the villagers bowed their heads in silent prayer, a soft breeze swept through the gathering. The torches flickered but did not go out, and for a brief moment, the river shimmered with an otherworldly light. Kwame felt a deep sense of peace wash over him, as if the spirit itself had acknowledged their effort. Redemption's dawn. The morning after the vigil dawned with a serenity that had long been absent from Nyoka. The village awoke to a sky painted in soft hues of pink and gold, and the air carried a freshness that seemed to cleanse not just the earth, but the hearts of those who lived upon it. For Kwame, the day felt like a fragile gift, one he would cherish with every breath. The memories of the spirit, the pact, and the curse lingered, but they no longer held the power to overshadow his hope. Ao, vibrant and full of life once more, spent her morning tending to the herbs she had gathered. Her smile, once dimmed by fear and sickness, now radiated with a quiet confidence. She was becoming what she had always dreamed of, a healer, not just for her family, but for the village. Watching her from the doorway of their home, Kwame felt a swell of pride and gratitude. His mistakes had nearly cost him everything, yet here was Ao, a living testament to second chances. The village square, which had been the site of tension and judgment for so long, now buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. The people of Nyoka had come together after the vigil, and the truths they had spoken by the river had sown the seeds of unity. It was not perfect, wounds like theirs did not heal overnight, but it was a beginning. The villagers approached Kwame with cautious warmth, offering nods, small smiles, and even the occasional word of encouragement. Slowly, the walls of distrust began to crumble. That afternoon, Nana Oba visited the farm. The elder moved with deliberate slowness, her walking stick tapping rhythmically against the ground. Ao greeted her warmly, offering her a seat beneath the shade of a mango tree. Kwame joined them shortly after, carrying a small bowl of freshly harvested yams. "Nana," he said, placing the bowl before her, "I don't know how to thank you. Without your guidance, I would have been lost." The elder smiled, her eyes crinkling with wisdom and warmth. "The path to redemption is never walked alone, Kwame," she said. "But you must take the steps yourself, and you did. That is what matters." Kwame nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Do you think the spirit will return?" he asked quietly. Nana Oba tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "The spirit's purpose is not to haunt, but to test," she said. "It has no need to return here, not unless the lessons it brought are forgotten. But you have faced your shadows, and so has the village. The balance has been restored, for now." Her words lingered in Kwame's mind long after she left. The idea of balance, of living in harmony with the forces that governed both the physical and spiritual realms, resonated deeply. He realized that the spirit had not been his enemy, but a reflection of the consequences of his choices. It had revealed the truths he had hidden from himself, forcing him to confront his flaws and embrace change. In the days that followed, Kwame dedicated himself not just to his farm, but to the village. He offered his help freely, mending fences, sharing his harvest, and teaching others the techniques that had brought life to his barren land. Ao, too, found her place within the community. Her knowledge of herbal medicine grew quickly, and soon the villagers sought her out for remedies and advice. She became a bridge between her father and the people of Nyoka, her warmth and compassion dissolving the last remnants of doubt. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kwame and Ao stood together by the river. The water sparkled under the fading light, its current steady and calm. Ao leaned against her father, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you think life will always be this peaceful, Papa?" she asked softly. Kwame smiled, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Life will always have its trials, my daughter," he said. "But peace is something we carry within ourselves. As long as we remember what we've learned, we can face whatever comes." Ao nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "The spirit taught us more than it hurt us, didn't it?" "It did," Kwame agreed. "And for that, I'm grateful. We may not understand everything it did or why, but it brought us closer, to ourselves, to each other, and to our village. That is a gift I will never take for granted." The two stood in silence for a while, the river flowing steadily before them. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Kwame felt a profound sense of closure. The journey he had begun with a desperate pact had led him to this moment, where he could finally see the beauty of what he already had. As they turned to walk back to the farm, Kwame glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the faint shimmer of golden eyes in the distance. But there was nothing, only the soft glow of fireflies dancing in the twilight. The spirit was gone, its work complete, and as father and daughter walked hand in hand toward their home, they carried with them the lessons of their ordeal. That love, humility, and courage were the true treasures of life, and that even in the darkest moments, redemption was always within reach.